I'll hand it off to you here. Oh, there we go. Good afternoon, Tuesday, February 25th, 2025, a brand new week. And we are starting off in here in house transportation with our guest, Clayton Clark from Green Mountain Transit. Our witness will be up first. And I'm not sure, we have 5 new members, so maybe we'll go around and introduce ourselves real quick. We already know each other. We've been here for 3 years, all 3 years that I've been on the committee. Matt Walker from Swanton and Sheldon.
Tim Parker from Bennington.
Kate Riley from Sheldon. Holly Burke from Brattleboro. Chloe Tomlinson, Winooski.
And Casey Hubbard.
Chris Keyser, Rutland City.
Candace White from Waitsfield.
Ken Wells, Orleans County.
Phil House, great town, Heinsberg.
Great town of Heinsberg. Excellent.
And especially with you going last, you didn't give anyone else the opportunity. So I like the way you did that.
And with that, I guess we've talked enough about, or talked plenty about public transit in terms of earlier conversations and the agency's been in, but now it is your turn to see what it looks like from your side. So please take it away.
Thank you so much, and wish you luck with the game. Hope that your career in basketball is extended to Friday, and I hope everybody does well with nobody injured. And so I arrived on the scene just about the same time that Chair Walker did. And I just passed my 2-year anniversary at Green Mountain Transit. And my name's Clayton Clark. I'm the general manager. Very proud to serve the people of Vermont in this role. And prior to coming to GMT, I had spent a career working in human services, both in the nonprofit world as an executive director of a long-term care facility. And then with the state, I ran adult protective services, licensing and protection, and veterans affairs for a while. So I've been coming to the State House for a couple decades. In fact, was here in the 2000s with the Representative Burke and Representative Corcoran talking about license plates, veteran motorcycle plates, Gold Star plates. And so I have spent a lot of time in this committee over the years, but not recently. And so thinking about where we are, one of the things I like to do is something back from my military days. I should have mentioned that I used to be an officer in the Air Force, is the whole bottom line up front concept, so that you don't have to wonder where we stand on the big picture issues. And so GMT is in support of the administration's fiscal year 26 budget. The budget is coming in higher than we had originally forecast. We appreciate the administration designating additional funds for GMT, and you'll hear how those will be used later in the presentation. We are going to be discussing rural transfer. And so our Board of Commissioners is on board with continuing to study transferring our rural service. I think that we're in alignment with the other transit providers, that we're still kind of in a study mode to make sure that this transition makes sense for our riders and communities and the organizations. And lastly, something that we heard a lot, the last time that I was here, was just this desire for GMT to really, rethink its practices, to reduce operating costs, to try to get us to a more sustainable long-term funding. So just want to make sure that you all know that these are items that we're on board with and we'll be working towards. And I think that you'll hear, that we're making good progress. So I want to do a little bit of jargon check before I talk about our service. I'm going to be talking about a variety of demand response programs, and I want to tell you what they are before I tell you that we do them. And so ADA service is service for Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. This is where we help folks use fixed route service when they have a disability that would prevent them from doing so. NEMT is the Medicaid transportation, and OND used to be END, which is the older and disabled person's transportation. And these kind of form the different braids of the braided system that if you haven't heard from Ross about, you likely will. So with that covered, I want to go sort of county by county to let you know what we do, just so that you know that basics. And so in Chittenden County, we're really focused on the fixed route service. Those are the big buses that you see traveling in and around the Burlington area. And so this is where we've been having service reductions to help with our overall funding gap. We've already approved $700,000 a year worth of service reductions. We have another 500,000 projected for June 2025, and that's with the governor's budget, just so folks are aware. And so what that means is that we expect that we're going to be starting fiscal year 26 with about 1.2 million less in service than we started fiscal year 25 with. Looking beyond fixed route in Chittenden County, we have the braided services performed by SSTA, so Special Services Transportation Association. They are the ones that we contract with to do the ADA service. One of the things that's different in our urban areas is that in rural areas, the bus will deviate to help people get to their places. With urban buses, we don't do that because the buses are large and would be difficult to navigate side streets, and they just are moving too many people for us to be able to stay on time with that model. So SSTA provides that service along with that O&D and NEMT demand response talked about. Looking in Washington County, we do the fixed route here in Washington County as well. We also do the MyRide, which was the state's first microtransit pilot. I can tell you that pilot is ending this year, and I suspect that there will be some changes to that program. As with most pilots, we learned a lot, and I think that whatever changes come about will be informed by that learning. Unlike in Chittenden County, we do the demand response. In Washington County, we do it in partnership with Gopher or Community Rides Vermont. Very happy that Chris Cole, former Green Mountain Transit general manager, and certainly somebody who has mentored me in the past years, is a good partner with us there. In addition, we do the seasonal fixed route service in support of Mad River Valley's tourism with Sugarbush. And so that sums up our Washington County service. Looking in Franklin and Grand Isle, similar to Washington County, we do both the fixed route and the demand response in Franklin County. But for Grand Isle, the demand response is provided by Champlain to Islanders, delivering essential resources. So that's what CIDR stands for. And they do that on our behalf. And we're super happy that the relationship with them allows them to sometimes use their excess capacity to help us in Franklin County. And there's no reductions that are being considered in these counties. And then lastly, Lamoille County service, we have the Stowe seasonal fixed route service. This moves over 100 or provides over 100,000 rides a year. It's one of our most widely used and dense that we have, and we don't expect any reductions for the Lamoille County service. So overall in ridership, looking at the most recent route performance report, which VTrans puts together each year, we have about 2.7 million rides total that we're providing. And you can see with that breakout where that's between the urban and the rural. And so, clearly our urban service is where, a bulk of the rides in our service area is provided. And so that is really, as you'll see in the next slide, where about half of Vermont's transit happens, public transit happens. And then on the rural side, much less. And you'll see the budget numbers and comparisons here, where the GMT overall is providing 57% of the statewide trips for public transit. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight, because we'll be talking about the rural transfer, is that our 389,000 rides that we do in rural is just a bit over the 369,000 that Tri-Valley Transit and RCT do. And so one of the things that, just I want to make sure folks understand the scale that these organizations would significantly expand with the rural transfers. Looking at our budgets, we have one of the things about GMT is that we are a rare unicorn in that we have urban and rural transportation in the same organization. We were only able to find one other organization outside of California that has this because urban and rural transit are funded through separate programs with the FTA. And looking at our approximately $51 million budget, about 20 million is operating for rural, about 10 million operating, 20 million operating for urban, 10 million operating for rural, and for about 30 million combined for operating, and then those combined about 20 million for capital. And one thing I do just want to let folks know is that these are projected. Obviously, depending on the outcome of the T-bill, any potential changes that may happen at the federal administration, this is what we're projecting, but this is not funds in hand. And I want to take a moment to talk about stick factors because it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And so STIC is an acronym for Small Transit Intensive City. And a stick factor is if we perform above average on a stick factor, we get extra money. And so there's 6 stick factors. Right now, we are getting 4 stick factors. I'm proud of the fact that there's only 11% of small transit agencies in the country get 4 or more. And as a result, we get just about $2 million in additional federal revenue from these factors. And the real story with the stick factors is that we just have to make sure that whatever we do with our service doesn't end up having us lose these because it could end up compounding our fiscal gaps. And so as you'll hear, we have a large gap in fiscal year 27 of $3 million. And my concern is that if we were to cut service by $3 million, that would likely mean losing these stick factors, which really would mean that we would have to cut $5 million worth of service. And so that's an important consideration for the committee.
A stick factor, obviously ridership, I guess, is one of them. What real brief, what would be some of the other, you said there were 6 of them. What are some of the other?
There's 6 of them. They are based on ridership per revenue hour, ridership per mile. I can tell you that the godfather of public transit is joining us here. I should have introduced him in the beginning, and that's Stephen Faubel. And so if you would like to, he can probably rattle those off the top of his head. Stephen, would you like to become alive and so I can phone a friend?
Sure. Yeah, the stick factors, 4 of them are based on the amount of service and ridership per capita. So that's the passenger trips per capita, revenue miles per capita, passenger miles per capita, and then a couple of them are based on how well service is used. So that's what Clayton referred to already, passenger miles per revenue mile, which is essentially the average number of people on GMT services at any given time, and passengers per revenue hour. So it's just measures how much service you have based on your population and how effective your service is. So it can get more complicated, but that's the basics.
I think one of the things that the stick factors tell me is that first off, that we have an above average level of transit, but we also have above average usage of transit. And so I'm glad that those things are going together. If we had above average costs and below average usage, I would be very worried, but I'm glad that those are going hand in hand. And any other questions about the stick factors before I?
So Would you surmise that you're receiving these stick factor recognition for your urban transit? Not your
Yes.
rural?
I should mention that stick factors only apply to urban transit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So potential cutting or shifting of the rural market, you would expect will not affect your stick ratings?
I would expect that it would not. Where it may is just depending on the commuter lines that are going to be running in and out of Chittenden County. But I suspect those would still, fall under our stick count. So I think that it would be A-okay. All right. And I will say that I'm kind of going through this because this is the part of the portion of the presentation that I hate, which is where I'm talking at you, and I would rather have a conversation. But feel free to jump in and if there's anything that I can clarify, and then we can talk after. So on February 1st, there was a legislative report that was due that was we were asked to focus on the rural question. And I wanted to make sure that you all understood what is in that report, because I do not want you all to read it because it's like 532 pages. And so what you would find there is, first off, we had Stephen, the godfather of public transit in Vermont, is the person who did the study on whether or not it would make sense to do the rural transfer. And that study is what came up with the recommendation to transfer. So you'll find his assessment in its entirety. You will also find an org assessment that he did for us that really was sort of the genesis of that rural question. And so when I arrived, GMT was sort of in crisis. We had a lot of our leadership team was planning on departing, and there was a desire on our part and VTrans's part to study what was going on with the organization. And so that whole org assessment is included in the report so that you can see the challenges. I'll touch upon some of those. We also included in the report, of course, our assessment, and I'll provide you those recommendations in a second. The bulk of the report had to do with the feedback on the urban service reductions. So there's several hundred pages of feedback that we've received in public meetings, and also with people providing us their direct feedback via mail and email. And so those are provided in their entirety. And lastly, the Teamsters that represent our workforce in Franklin County has done some community engagement, and they asked for folks in their area to provide commentary about the potential transfer, and that is included there as well as the last item. Going into a little deeper dive, that external org assessment that I told you about, that Stephen and a colleague of his, Jason Lorber, former representative here, went through. What they saw was that there was a 42% reduction in managerial capacity at GMT between 2012, roughly when Chris departed, and 2023 when I arrived. And essentially what would happen is over the past decade or so, whenever there was financial constraints, that would lead to not reductions in service, but reductions in administrative staff. That really hollowing out of our managerial capacity is what I consider to be the root cause of our performance issues that we've had in previous years. Some of those performance issues have overflowed into this committee, and so I just want to recognize that we've had a challenge being a good partner with VTrans and the legislature because of that capacity issue. And to me, this really is the origin of the question of whether or not we should transfer our service, because what that org assessment essentially determined was that we are staffed appropriately for a small urban transit agency. We are not staffed appropriately for a small urban transit agency that also has a rural component. Our internal assessment after the org assessment and study was that, hey, we need to increase capacity. It's going to be hard to do while we're also facing financial uncertainty. One of the ways that we've been looking at that is by looking at staffing grants to help. And so, for example, we were able to get a grant through CCRPC to increase the number of planners that we have from 1 to 3. And, that's really going to be helping us as we do the extra work that we have to do in the future, modifying our service. And really, overall, one of the things that we discovered is that GMT needs to act more like our smaller counterparts. And so our smaller counterparts don't have assessment authority like we do in our urban area. And so they go out, they work with communities, they provide value to their communities so that they are able to generate the local match. And that is why I think that a lot of the smaller rural providers, have much more community engagement than we do. And because I think that we need to emulate them, I wanted to show this indirect rate comparisons. And I will say that one of the dangers of presenting in Vermont is that Stephen, the Godfather, will correct me. And so he did point out, because I shared this with him in advance, that I defined indirect rate slightly incorrectly. So I apologize for that. It is the percentage of funds divided by the direct costs, not the total costs. But the point here is still the same, which is that when you look at the amount of funds that GMT spends on non-operational activities, it's super low compared to the other agencies. Part of that we should absolutely expect because we run an urban operation that moves a lot of people. But I think that a more healthy spot for us would be around that 10% there. And I think that then we could become a much more reliable and better partner for everybody. Oh, yeah.
So is the assumption there that these other transit agencies with higher percentages of indirect rate comparisons, their staff is spending time in meetings with local townspeople?
Exactly.
That's basically what the activity is.
Exactly. And so they are going out and what I like to refer to is that they're going and earning their money. And so they're working with the large employers, large human services organizations, talking about this is the value that we're providing. And then these folks voluntarily contribute, their local dollars, which is a very different model than we have with urban, where we just issue an assessment that says, hey, this is how much you owe. Looking at the rural transfers portion of the study, we are very much in alignment with RCT and TVT that there continues to need to be study on this because the devil is in the details. One of the areas that we are a little bit different from VTrans in perspective is that the consultant, Stephen, and VTrans thinks that the rural transfer should be all or nothing, where we think a partial transfer may actually, provide improvements. And what we think is going to be the biggest challenge of the transfer is labor relations in Franklin County. People may have seen that there's already been a few news stories on this. I suspect that there will be a few more on it. And so the short or the Reader's Digest version there is that service in Franklin County would be transferred to a non-union provider. As you could probably imagine, our union employees are not supportive of that, and they're working to actively resist that. And then again, one of the things I do just want to make sure that folks are aware is that it's a doubling in size. So this is a real change in organizational culture, that these organizations are going to have to be considering. All right, so let's talk about the dismal science of urban service reductions. And so last year at this time, we talked with the legislative committees about our fiscal gaps. We got some additional funds, which we really appreciate, but we also got a very clear message that we needed to learn to live within our means. And good luck, Chairman Walker.
Thank you.
Thanks. And so to that end, our fiscal year 26 budget will have about 1.2 million less service than our fiscal year 25. 700,000 of those reductions have already been approved or implemented. 500,000 will be approved and implemented in June. And I want to kind of walk you through what those changes so far have been. So in December, we eliminated the Jeffersonville commuter. That is a line that connected Jeffersonville and Lamoille County to downtown Burlington. This was a service that was highlighted in the route performance report as being economically inefficient and was costing us a little over $60 per passenger to operate. We then, in December, focused on Saturday service for the other reductions, and primarily with elimination of the 10, which on Saturday, which is what connects Williston to Essex Junction. And that was another route that VTrans had highlighted as being underperforming. And then we also shortened the span of the day on Saturdays with having one route start a little bit later and 3 routes end a little bit earlier. And I should mention, I forgot to say when I started the service reductions, one of the things that our board did last summer and working with the public was to sort of create a values, list as far as what do we value most with our urban service. And what we heard strongly from just about everybody was the prioritization of local service over commuter service and weekday service over weekend service. And so you can see in these December reductions, they're entirely focused on a poorly performing commuter route and weekend service.
Wait, how many riders did just like a ballpark of these 3 reductions?
So I can tell you that the Jeffersonville commuter was averaging about 25 folks a day. And I think that the number 10 service was about 30,000 ridership for the year, but not just Saturday. I don't have it for right off the top of my head. Would certainly be able to get that for you. And Saturday service was much less than weekday service on that route, which is one of the reasons why we said.
And then the feedback has been?
So far, we haven't gotten negative feedback on these cuts. We have gotten a lot of feedback from the Jeffersonville commuter because even though it was only 25 trips a day we were providing, which comes to about 12 or 13 people using it for round trips, those folks were really impacted.
Representative Thomason?
Okay.
Could you speak a bit to how you collect the data that you use to inform these decisions?
Yeah, and so we do it through a combination of ride check, where we actually have people ride the buses and count where they're getting on and getting off. And now that we've returned to fares, starting in May of last year, we have additional fare data that provides us some of the same.
So you actually charge fares?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And everybody else doesn't? Just
That is correct. So fares right now are only in our urban operational area in our commuter. Yeah.
what's the fare? How much?
$2. Yeah, and a discount fare is $1.
And that helps out, right?
It provides about 10% of our revenue. So absolutely.
How much money are you getting from, and I'm sure it varies, how much money are you getting from donations from?
Like for our municipal contributions? Or?
Yeah.
So in our rural areas, we receive about $500,000 in local match. I would say the majority of that comes from the seasonal services that are operated in support of Sugar Bush and Stowe seasonal service. In our urban areas, we collect about $4 million this year budgeted from our member municipalities, and which is 20% of our overall operating.
And the rest of it comes from the state?
It comes from the federal government, provides anywhere between, probably 55, 60%. Then the state provides funds. And what makes things confusing with the state is that you have state transportation dollars, which are state funds, but then V-Trans also makes decisions about federal highway funds that gets transferred. So even though they're technically federal dollars, the decision-making on how they're used is made by V-Trans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Representative Bose?
Yeah, you talked about union drivers. Are all the GMT drivers union drivers? And what do those veteran drivers get per hour? And what's the difference between the rate of a non-union and a union driver?
And so there's no longer a requirement. There was some court cases not too long ago about that you can't have people forced to be union members. And so nobody is forced. And so what I can tell you is that it's a case-by-case decision. I think that, like, if you look at our St. Albans area, I know that they have 6 members out of, I think, 11 folks who are eligible. When you look at our Washington County, it's, I think, a bit higher than that. But, and the pay is the same, whether they're a union member or not. And so right now, and this is something that I was going to come to later, but happy to do now. So we pay a $30 per hour to our drivers, whether they've been with us 1 day or 40 years. And so there isn't a, an increase over time. And that's the pay that you get whether you work in the Burlington area or in our rural areas. Okay. And we have struggled with recruitment. Like, I know that, some folks have expressed concern about that $30 per hour rate. But for most of the past 2 years, we have had service reductions in Washington County because we haven't been able to recruit enough. So it is just the reality that nationwide there's a CDL shortage. That shortage is here in Vermont as well. And so that means that there's been real inflationary pressures on CDL wages.
Representative Bose?
Yeah, just along those lines, how do you keep your good veteran drivers if you don't give them a raise?
I think that one of the things that they find that they prioritize seniority, because that's what determines when the runs that you're out. And so if you're a brand new driver and you have the low seniority, that means you're probably working mostly nights and weekends. And the more senior drivers will typically work Monday through Friday, usually an earlier shift, so that they'll be out at the day. And so really what they're prioritizing is sort of their work schedule. The other thing that, and I will be touching upon this a little bit later also, is that we do provide 100% health insurance. And so that is a big incentive. One of the things that's helpful for us, though, is that even though we provide that 100%, we purchase our health insurance through the Teamsters, which is the union that represents our employees. And the thing that's nice about the Teamsters is that we are able in our negotiations to build in increase caps. So, like, when you look at the past 5 years, our biggest increase in health insurance costs was 6.5%. Most places are looking at double-digit way over. And we were actually able to negotiate into our last contract with them that we will have our health insurance costs capped at 6% for the life of the contract. So we don't have to worry about an 18 or 20% health insurance bump up in 1 year because of that. Okay, and let's see. So those are the December reductions.
Representative.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Before we move on, I just wanted to ask.
They're 3 years. Yeah. We did extend the last urban contract 1 year. So I guess technically that ended up being 4 years, but they're typically a 3 year. The scheduled to happen in March and then also in June is going to be some reductions in commuter service. And so for the Montpelier link, we're going to be going from 11 daily trips to 7. And then in June, we're going to be consolidating the Milton commuter and the St. Albans link. And so right now, the St. Albans link and the Milton commuter run parallel to each other, one down 89, one down Route 7, and we're going to consolidate those. One of the reasons why I think that this is making sense, even if there's not a financial challenge, is that the one area that we have not seen ridership return since the pandemic is these commuter routes. They are about half of the ridership that they were pre-pandemic. And so I think that consolidating that route and going from 11 to 7, really sort of reflects the current ridership level.
Excuse me.
Zoom type. And then in June, and this is where I'm really thankful for the administration's budget, because prior to that being released, we were thinking that we were going to need to cut 1.2 million worth of service in June. Glad that that's down to 500,000. I'm happy to report that we won't be eliminating any additional routes with that decreased amount. And sort of similar to what you heard with the last slide, we're going to be making some changes that I think make real fiscal sense, even if we weren't in a financial crisis. One of the things that we're going to be doing, which I think is going to be especially helpful, is decreasing our summer schedule. And so, close to a third of our ridership is students from UVM and Champlain College. And when they leave, you see a big dip in ridership. In fact, July is about half the ridership that our months are that are in session. So, having a reduced schedule makes sense, especially because traditionally we've paid a ton of overtime in the summer because that's when people want vacations. And so I think that will be a good cost savings. We're going to be rerouting the number 10. The number 10 has been underperforming on the route performance report for 9 years. And so we're going to change its routing to see if we can fix that. And we're going to have the frequency of the city loop that's in Burlington, and we think that we can do that without impacting our most vulnerable riders, because that city loop operates in an area where some of our other lines are also operating, so that there will be, if people are able to do a slight walk, they will still be able to have access. So that's what we're looking for service reductions. Yep.
Representative.
Oh, yes.
Yes, thanks for all of this. I realize if, there's transfer to the rural.
Yep.
And the number of bus drivers and stuff, that'll all sort of shake up quite a bit.
Yes.
But with these reductions, will there be a reduction in the number of drivers and that sort of operational support staff?
So to get to the first point, our urban drivers and rural drivers have separate contracts. And so if there was going to be a transfer, none of our urban drivers would be directly impacted from the rural transfer. I am happy to report that we, if the budget were to pass what the governors recommend, we are not anticipating a layoff action this year. If it had been a $1.2 million gap that we had to fill, then likely we would. We've also been lucky. I don't know if I should say lucky, but it was also in the news that, for example, that South Burlington was paying $34 an hour to start for bus drivers, which is, $4 more than we pay. Not shockingly, a few folks have left and have gone to work there. And so since we've had some voluntary departures, it's helped us with, and we're not filling those, that's also helped us avoid layoffs. Yeah. And so even though I'm very optimistic about fiscal year 26, I'm very worried about fiscal year 27. And that's because that's where we have the $3 million gap. This is because it will be the first fiscal year where all of our COVID relief funds are fully gone. And so we are, over the fiscal cliff at this point in time. And I think that really one of the things that GMT is going to have to do, if we don't resolve this funding, is that we're going to have to decide whether we're focused on getting commuters to work or helping, people with human services get services that they need. I'm not sure we'll be able to do both. And so that is something that we'll certainly would like your, input on. I would definitely see if this were to happen, we would probably end up losing our stick factors, which means that, really we would probably just be limited to our core urban routes for service. I do want to talk a little bit about the 2024 route performance report. There was 3 of our routes that were identified as not working as well as they should. One we've already eliminated with the Jeffersonville commuter. One we were about to reroute to hopefully make it more productive, and we're sort of lopping off the lesser productive portion of that route and keeping the higher productivity portion. So we're hopeful that will see those metrics turn around. And the one of our Mad River Valley floor routes is not performing as well as it should. The one thing that I would say is that the route performance report is super important, but it's just one type of measurement. One of the things the route performance report doesn't measure is the revenue that is attached. And so we get a very good local match for that run, even though it may not be, performing. And so that's something that we'll be considering.
Representative Hood?
Just regarding the service in the Mad River Valley Mad River Valley. Do you have ridership information on that route? And also, what does Sugarbush contribute to that?
I will have to get back to you on both of those. Yeah, but happy to do so. Yeah. Let's see. And let me write that down so that I do not forget Sugarbush. Okay. Do want to let folks know that we return to fairs in May. Folks may recall that there was a delay in our return to fairs because of some IT hiccups with our vendor, but we're really happy that since returning to fairs, we have not seen a ridership decrease. And so there was a projection that we would lose 15% of our riders. I think that that initial projection was if GMT returned to its old cash-based fare system. And I'm happy that our new system, which is much more user-friendly, we can accept payment with credit card, debit card, phone, smart cards, that we have not seen a decrease. And that's really important for those stick factors. And I'm happy to report that we are, we have a revenue target of 10%. We're at 9.7. So we're not quite to the target, but we're pretty darn close. And our board did establish a new target for fare revenue of 15%. I can talk to you all about how we will go about doing that if you're interested, but I don't want to take up more time because I see that I'm going through here much slower than I had thought. I want to let you all know that we created a affiliated nonprofit. And so GMT is set in statute as a municipality. But one of the things that we wanted to do is increase our revenue options. And so we've already registered with the Secretary of State. We're awaiting the IRS 501c3, and that will give us an opportunity to go for some grants. We think that especially grants that are focused on human services aspects of public transit will give us some good opportunities. And again, this is another way that we're looking to emulate the rural providers. When I leave here, I'll be going to negotiations with the Teamsters, and so we are negotiating our next 3-year contract with them. One of the things that I just have to be open about is that all of our projections are based on where we think we will end at the end of negotiations. But of course, that is a guess. And so that means that some of these projections could be very different depending on how those negotiations go. Since pay and benefits is something that I frequently get asked about, and I touched upon a little bit earlier, I won't spend too much time here. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is that our GMT board has set the 25th percentile when it comes to our administrative salaries. So that means that if somebody were at the 50th percentile, that would be the median, and or average. I mean, they're slightly different, but and so I wanted to make sure that people know that our administrative staff are actually paid less than average for comparable jobs in Burlington. And we also have an extremely progressive pay scale. So like when you look at the top 10 wage earners of fiscal year 24, 6 of them were drivers. And as the general manager, I wasn't even the highest, paid employee. And a driver was, and I'm fine with that. I think that that's I think that shows you that we're putting our money where service is.
Representative Lavin?
Yeah.
Or is it only the drivers that fall under the union contract?
So we have 2 driver contracts and 1 maintenance contract for our mechanics and custodians.
Representative White?
How are the 6 highest paid people at GMT drivers if all drivers get paid $30 an hour?
Overtime. Yes. Yeah. And so I can tell you those 6 folks, probably worked, 800 to 1,000 hours of overtime, to get to there. So they worked hard for their money. One of the other things that makes us slightly different is that for whatever reason, a municipal bus driver can operate a bus for 15 hours a day, where a private bus driver can only for 10 hours a day. So and to me, that's one of the other factors for why 30 makes more sense, because they're sometimes being asked to drive very long. And so that does mean that people that want to work overtime can really, work a lot of overtime.
Representative Couch?
So it's important, I think, for me to understand that, GMT provides the bus services, commuters and routes and whatnot.
Yes.
But then really you do also provide the ADA and all that, even though it's contracted out.
Yes.
So here's a question I don't think I've ever asked anybody.
Mhm.
If you took away the O&D, the ADA,
Mhm.
and the money that you get for that,
Yep.
but now don't have to pay for it,
Mhm.
would just the bus route service be in better position? In other words, is it a drain on the overall funding?
Well, I'm gonna go back to my slide on the budget, because I addressed this and there we go, on the ridership. So there's no doubt that, the ADA bus or the ADA paratransit service, is expensive. And it's about 2% of our total rides, but about 9% of our budget. One of the things that I could certainly think that would be helpful is if the state helped us with the ADA costs, because the rural providers have that ADA service sort of built into their system, since they're deviating their buses, and where we have to pay for it as a separate.
And the amount of deviation is it 2 miles? What was the?
3/4 of a mile.
3/4 of a mile, right?
Yeah. Yes, which, as you can imagine, deviating an urban bus 3/4 of a mile just can't. Yeah. So yes, definitely a place that we know that we need to work on, because it does have an outsized impact on our budget, even though we are committed to providing the
Sure.
service.
Yeah, I'm not at all saying.
Representative Lavin?
Do you anticipate that this 501c3 that you're putting together would facilitate with getting additional resources that might help offset some of this? Is that the thinking behind that?
That certainly is the hope. I think that things that we're thinking of would be, like services at our transit centers that would be, potentially good. But also, one of the things that we noticed is that there's sometimes a gap between where good transit works, economically, but where transit's needed for human services. And so, for example, the number 11 service of ours was previously identified as being not performing well, but it's also the route that goes directly by the methadone clinic. And so, that's certainly a factor that we would, consider. And my hope is that potentially we would be able to, either through grants or fundraising, be able to say, hey, we want to run this route because of its important, need, but it doesn't make transit sense, but it makes human services sense. I do want to let you know that there is a bill, H-255, that is going to be going to the Judiciary Committee. And that would add transit workers to the list of professionals protected in statute. And one of the things that I'm sad to report is nationwide, transit workers are 3 times more likely to be assaulted now than they were 15 years ago. We are experiencing this in Burlington. We had 4 of our employees assaulted last year, which is 5% of our urban workforce. One of those assaults happened to a driver while they were driving in Burlington. And so if you could imagine what the outcome could have been of somebody being attacked while driving a 40-foot bus in Burlington could be. And so that's certainly something that is on our mind. Yeah.
What was the situation? What was some of the situations that came about that they got attacked or whatever?
And so in this particular situation, there was a person driving on a busy street. The driver was driving on a busy street. The person wanted to get off immediately, and it wasn't at a stop. And when the person said, "Hey, I'm going to drop you off right up there," that was not the answer the person wanted to hear, and attacked the driver. Yeah. I can tell you that thinking about the assaults that I'm aware of, some of them are random. Like I just see a video of a bus driver coming to the door of his bus. He just stands there to kind of stretch, and a woman walks by and clocks. No interaction, no, it just sort of the randomness that it happens. But we also get folks who are having disputes with each other that we end up getting involved in, and especially if somebody is not honoring the code of conduct, is behaving in such a way that we have to ask them to leave, that leads to conflict as well.
So, is this, you're speaking for Green Mountain Transit for this bill?
Yes.
Is it also Vermont, the organization Vermont?
VPTA?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they also,
My understanding is that they will support, and I don't know, Jamie, if you have the official green light to issue anything about that yet?
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Representative Kuzic.
Thank you very much for this. A great thing to have the information. So a couple, 3 or 4 questions here. Does the transit systems in Vermont have an association?
Yes, the Vermont Public Transit Association, and that association is actually the contractor for Medicaid transportation.
Okay, so is it like a trade association where you would get together and share information?
Yes.
Do you share information?
Yes.
Do you categorize that and use it in your operations?
Yes.
Okay.
And I will say that with the facilitation and assistance of, it was like, where'd Roscoe? VTrans is very much a part of that. Yeah.
So if I went to, and I am going to go to the bus in Rutland and ask for similar numbers, I would get them from them?
I believe so, because we all use the same report card.
Okay, great. This is very important. One thing I did notice, and I'm missing this, it's my background, but typically when you have an operation and you change it, you have pro formas. You have pro formas that tell you what would happen when you make these changes. Do you have any of those?
As far as for the rural transfer?
Anything?
Oh, trying to think I would say we don't have anything that's called a pro forma. Essentially, when we evaluate a route, we go through a process.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about the larger operation.
No, then we don't, then I wouldn't say,
So, but you do have you have a budget, we know that.
yes.
So that is a type of pro forma.
Mhm.
Okay, so you don't do anything like 4 years down the road or anything else like that that shows.
We should, but I think that this is an example where our staffing situation has made us much more focused on the present than we should be.
Yeah, understood.
Mhm.
Okay. So I would like a copy of your current P and L in the
Okay.
last 2 years, please. Thank you.
And how about our auditor's report?
How many pages is it?
Oh, I think probably about 60 some
No,
odd.
thank you.
Okay, but it will have the P and L in it.
That's okay. I just
Okay.
want,
Okay.
want the numbers.
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll make sure you get it.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate
What do you got? Two more pages here? Or is that it? I guess you're done.
I do want to let you know that urban assessment reform is ongoing. We also have asked our members for an additional 308,000 this year in order to meet our financial situation. Our statute requires all of them to vote in unanimously to give us more money, though. So, and only 3 of the 8 have voted yet. So we don't know if we'll receive that. And now, finally, questions. And I will stop sharing so people can see the room.
We got all the questions? No, I guess not. Senator Burke.
Yeah, so regarding your funding, you said something about, people are not, you don't have businesses contributing to your efforts. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You assess people.
Yes, and so in our urban system, we get our local match through an assessment to the municipal member of GMT. And what we don't do is, go to the hospital directly. And so I think that what you would probably hear from the hospital and large employers is that, oh, well, we pay our municipal taxes and then, the municipality then, pays us. But one of the things that I would like to see us work towards is diversifying our revenue stream so that we are approaching providers. And I think that there's going to be an opportunity to do that when we consider things like link service, because I think that you'll find that the hospital and the college, are probably getting the bulk of the folks that are using that service. And if we're going to retain it long term, we may need, them to contribute, specifically towards that.
I think that would be, to my mind, that seems like a really great idea.
Mhm.
Because, so they're paying municipal taxes, but they're getting a lot of other things, municipal taxes.
Right.
Because this is specifically their workforce, helping those people get to work. And sometimes people can't even take a job if they don't have transportation.
Absolutely.
So, right, we'll look forward to hearing more about that.
Representative Couch?
Yeah, just a comment and then another comment. One is, being able to approach the businesses, not only is it helping them get their workers, it also helps them reduce the amount of parking that they have, which is probably their biggest cost. And just a note that Green Mountain Transit's a public organization, so all of their meetings, everything's, all out in the open.
Yes, we operate very transparently.
Representative White?
I have 2 questions. One about your marketing and particularly interested in the rural setting, just kind of how you're getting the word out.
Yeah.
And 2, I wondered if you could talk about service that GMT is providing that is merging the public and school students.
Okay.
Do you have any examples of that?
And so I will tell you that, we have not done a good job marketing in our rural areas. When in 2012, we had a dedicated outreach person that would do marketing, would go to town meetings and talk to select boards, about this is the value that we're providing to your community. And that, unfortunately, is one of the positions that, when it became vacant, it was seen as a cost savings. So we are addressing that in Berlin right now when we brought on board Monica White So Monica White was previously the commissioner at Dale, where I had worked with the state. And when I saw her leave, I was like, "Hey, don't you want to come work for GMT?" And so she has been doing outreach for almost the past year in Washington County, but we really don't have that in Franklin County right now. In terms of the integration with schools, right now GMT operates what we call our neighborhood specials, which are routes that operate when the K through 12 school is in session. And these are public transit routes, meaning that anybody can get on them and travel them, but they're designed specifically to go through neighborhoods for school children. And I think that it has been, very successful. Outside of Burlington, we also have arrangements. I'll pick on the Essex Westford School District, where we get an agreement from them that allows their students to ride for free, and then they are using our service to get to school. And in fact, that is the modification of the 10 that we're looking at, would be really doubling down on making sure that the times would work for students, because one of the things that made us think that that the performance was bad there was because our route times didn't match very well with the school times. And so by getting those in sync, we hope that will increase that ridership.
All right, we all out of questions? Yeah, all right.
Actually,
No, I guess not.
just wanted to thank you for your military service.
Oh, thank you.
You mentioned it, so I had to.
I see you're wearing a pin. Are you one as well?
No,
Okay.
I would like to for my daughter, grandpa.
I was the first in my family to do it, and I think on day one I was like, what did I get myself?
People said
Yeah,
that.
but it was a good experience.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Blaine. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to transition into the agency's official response to the Green Mountain Transit Legislative Report. Next steps, and Ross, introduce yourself for the record and take it away.
Thank you. Ross McDonald, Public Transit Program Manager at V-Trans. I've been with the agency for 18 years and Program Manager for the last 5. I'm going to just set up and join. I just have only a few slides. And a couple notes as we get started. And I just want to recognize GMT's incredible work in the last year plus under Clayton's leadership in getting up to speed and reacting to the fiscal cliffs that they are seeing. And that V-Trans continues to support their efforts in the service reductions, as well as trying to meet them as best we can to prevent further reductions. And so we've got a lot of work to do. So it's
Representative Pouch?
Yeah, I'm gonna just jump in with a last minute question here. Green Mountain Transit transporting students during the school year for Burlington. The city of Burlington pays an assessment,
Yes.
but they don't pay, and so the assumption is within that assessment is the cost of those routes, or is that paid through their education district?
It is through a combination. And so the fiscal year 26 assessment for Burlington is 2.2 million. Included in that is the neighborhood special routes. But then we also receive an unlimited access contribution from Burlington City School Districts of 150,000, so that those that's what pays the fares for those students. So it's both.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
You see me, Karen?
For you, forget.
Oh, there you come.
Okay. Here we are. Thank you. Fortunately, I don't. Let's go ahead and share. See that key? Share. Okay, go ahead and share. There you go. Okay. Thank you for your patience. And we only have a few slides here. Clayton's done a great job of providing the overview for us. The perspective is statewide program, and if this affects GMT and TVT and RCT, and it also has implications throughout the state as we look to provide the most efficient services wherever our program lies. And so to just recap, the GMT study recommendations from Steve Fauble, who's been working with GMT for over 20 years and with VTrans for many years from Stedman to Hill. The all or nothing approach to rural service makes more sense than partial. The reason being is the admin time, the requirements, the oversight is the same, whether you've got a small rural program or a large rural program, as well as our oversight at VTrans, where if we had one fewer rural providers, that's one fewer set of oversight, management reviews, invoices to process, board meetings to attend, and the like. And so the all or nothing made sense to us as well. This report also recommends that this transition of rural to RCT and TVT would allow GMT to manage its urban service more effectively, efficiently. We see the $3 million challenge. We also support and agree with the recommendation that we have a lot of work to do with GMT and GMT on their own to try to get ahead of that $3 million 27 gap. And when we look at 1.2 million, 500,000 in savings, whatever it's going to be at the end of that transition, we as an agency and as a program manager, we're trying to run toward all ways to gain efficiencies or cut costs. And what that would do is any reduced cost per mile or per trip, that benefits all providers, both urban and rural services. Not a small part of it, but separate from transit, is the HS Department of Vermont Health Access, the people who run the Medicaid program, non-emergency medical transportation program, are seeing the same cost increases that we're seeing in the transit system. And they are pushing Vermont Public Transit Association to find ways to reduce costs. And so when we look at per trip costs associated with demand response, they're looking at the same numbers we're looking at, wondering what we can do to maintain that level of service. And that's why just a few weeks ago, we received a letter of support from the Vermont Public Transit Association stating, they remain committed to supporting changes if they lead to a stronger, more efficient and cost-effective system, and then are in the best interest of our statewide non-emergency medical transportation services and general public services. And so that's the association that works with GMT, that works with VTrans, and we do use that forum to share cost-effective, efficient ways to gain more volunteer drivers, to look at back office activities and how they're combining HR with outreach and these types of things. And we'll be soon embarking on this process. We did this a few years ago where we rolled up what anybody can identify as ways to cut costs, share it through the VPTA members, and then share it with the legislature, my budget committee, And everyone else, we need to show due diligence and a momentum of effort to reduce costs wherever we can. The implementation timeline is to be determined by and large. And this was in the report, but just last week, we announced an award to Stedman Hill, Steve Fauble, on a coordinated implementation assistance plan. I do believe that's the due diligence that is required for the next steps. And that really would be outlining all of the MOUs, the to-do lists, the timelines, capital transfers, vehicle transfers, all of those items. The facility plan is a big item that needs to be addressed. And so we will be working for the rest of this fiscal year on that plan so that we can start planning for this transition through FY26 for FY27 by and large. And what that just means is that we have an opportunity to be much more pragmatic and measured than in previous transfers of services and consolidations. We've had issues with insolvent organizations or a deterioration of boards and the like that really forced these types of transitions. This one allows us to take a step back, and with Steve's original report identifying benefits, the potential cost savings, the benefit to GMT's urban system. And now, instead of let's try to do this for July 1, 2025, let's take some time and do it for next year when we have to meet that cliff with GMT urban.
Representative Casey.
How much was the contract? Out of curiosity, I'm just,
Yeah, 35,000 for this next 17 months to put
Okay.
together the plan, and we're going to have at least monthly meetings to ensure that all four parties, are on track and on task for getting us to that finish line. Okay. The big ask today, and this is a big day in transit for the transit program, is for you to consider revising some of the legislative language to allow for this type of transition. It doesn't mean the transition has to happen. It means that it can happen if we go through the implementation plan and we're on the same page and we can move forward. Right now, the GMT statute specifically carves out the rural services. And I do have the language in this, not to review it, but just to provide it for this body to consider in the coming weeks. Transferring the Mountain Road Shuttle in fall of 2025, that seems fast to me. That's a tough system and service to get up and running, but we'll let that plan play out and to identify the real timelines. But the real goal is with new recipient agreements with CITR and the Grant and Grand Isle area, CarShare Vermont, SSTA or Gopher, that by July 2026, that GMT would be fully out of the rural service, able to focus entirely on urban. And as Clayton had mentioned, there's not too many of these entities that operate the 5307 urban and 5311 rural. It's a unicorn because it's rare, because it's really difficult to do both at once while staying bifurcated entirely between those programs. So here's the suggested update to the statute. This was part of the Stedman Hill report. It's just for your edification. All it does is very much simplify the description. And so I wanted to just revisit, and that was the recap of the study. But when we look at 16, 17, 18 years ago when I was here, we had an entity down here called DVTA. They joined with SCVT. We had Actor for Addison County Transportation Resources with Stagecoach over here. Those folks were able to consolidate. We had a Northwest entity that was in place that GMT subsumed, and we had this Wheels organization that Chris Cole was very instrumental in bringing that into the GMT umbrella when they were facing fiscal issues. What I'm using this image for is just to show that this is an ongoing suite of considerations as to how are we serving our communities, who are our partners, is RCT in a better position to take on some of these rural services from Franklin, and is TVT in a good position? We couldn't say yes 10, 20 years ago. We can say yes now. When we talk about indirect rates, and thank you for sharing the slides yesterday, because I was able to add a slide for us, which is showing the difference between, the indirect rates and the transit rates. Indirect rates, as described, how many of these costs can directly be attached to an activity in a line item in the budget. What we look at more is based on indirect and direct rates. What are the costs of an hour of transit service? And you can see the differences here. A good example is, let's say at GMT, I was their coordinator for 5 or 7 years here, and we would get invoices from their procurement manager for each one of their procurement line items to say I spent 15 minutes, 2.5 hours, 17 hours on these procurements. And in the other rural providers, they'd send us an invoice for that procurement, and that their salary was indirect, where it would be direct with GMT. And so, little differences of accounting can really make a big impact on your direct and indirect. FTA accepts 15% indirect rates without any review. If it's over 20%, they do look for justification. We can provide those to them. We generally use the 15% de minimis, which is allowed without any review. But you can see the differences in rates here between all of our providers. If we can move services from $140 to $116 or $95 an hour, that's real money. It represents a real opportunity. And given the fiscal cliffs that we've been talking about, it would seem likely that this would have to be at least one part of our several-pronged plan to recalibrate. When I mentioned recalibrate, just want to point to the Stedman Hill report that says that in GMT land for 20 years, there was this era of expansion. And then these last few years, since NextGen and COVID, we're now in this era of contraction. And the contraction that's happening, as Clayton was talking about, makes a lot of sense. The routes that didn't have the load factor, some of the inefficiencies that are being scrubbed, that is what we are going to be continuing to work on with our rural providers to continue to try to find the best return on investment and ensuring that we are able to lower costs where possible. And lower costs where possible, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to see the real numbers, which is our costs are expanding. And so as we try this era of contraction, it's concurrent to an era of budget expansion. And this does include the Medicaid program. That was $12, $13 million 3 or 4 years ago. It's now around $18 million. You can imagine they're wondering, what is BPTA going to do? And how can VTrans help lower some of these costs? And where the money is, ADA, 2% of your trips is 9% of your budget. These are the most expensive trips for the VPTA members. And you can see the difference between costs. If there's anything we can do to move from these costs to these costs, even to save a little bit of money, those costs, that's important. And wherever we can, we do need to find ways to increase these gray dots of volunteer percentages. This is Vermont Association of Blind Visually Impaired. They only provide volunteer drivers, so usually far away distances, not for specialty services. And so I did want to point out that demand response is the Medicaid program. It's also it's the most expensive component of all of our route classifications. And so I think I'm just about done here is how does this fit into the budget? And what's V-Trans plan? We hear about $3 million. Well, this is all part of the larger plan, which is starting in FY 26, we'll be incorporating $3 million in carbon reduction program funds. And that will be slated to cover rural operations projected shortfall and also partially cover the projected urban shortfall. When we talk about that $700,000, that's the additional funds from these dollars that can be treated like CMAQ dollars to help alleviate the need for $1.2 million in cuts. So if we can bring in 700,000, we make $500,000 on the urban side, that's showing a real momentum of effort to control costs.
Just a quick question, Representative Keiser.
Just a quick thing and probably help my education here. Carbon reduction program funds. Are those, go ahead.
Well, I'm concerned as well,
Okay.
Mr. Representative, but these are funds that have been awarded through federal fiscal year 25. And we've brought in $3 million of these carbon reduction program funds for our mobility and transportation innovation, transportation demand management grant. We're pulling in this $3 million for the operations. And we have $2.9 million that we've already transferred in for e-sprinters and the related charging equipment. And so $8.9 million from these new services to help prop up the transit program and to invest in reduction of our carbon footprint while we look to constrain and bend that cost curve down. So we have we bought ourselves just only a fiscal year here, but that's where the carbon reduction program funds are. And we are furiously getting those transferred now and as soon as possible, rather than in the future for obvious reasons.
And so there isn't another tranche of that unless it comes out.
Unless it comes out as planned, and we'll see. But we're not counting on this.
Yes, I got it. Good,
I'm not counting on that.
good.
No, questions keep on coming, Representative Burke.
Hi, Ross, thank you. So regarding the NTI funds and can you talk about the GOFA a little bit and where that fits in to and are there opportunities to sort of replicate that kind of thing? Would that be ways to sort of diversify service a little bit? Is the money there in the budget for that, for the GOFA?
Well, GOFA, we use two streams of money. We use our MTI funds to help with their program development and, burgeoning organization. And then we also apply $300,000 from our operations funds to help for the trip costs that they're providing, in addition to our overall trips that we provide for the O&D program and Medicaid and everything else. So when we look at the GOFA program, it really has been additive. It hasn't, and so when we look at, are there other ways to add partners and duplicate, some of these overheads with more money? I don't really see that because we don't have the funds to continue on with our current level of demand response services. So that's one of the things is, are there other projects out there? Neighborhood Connections is another one in the Ludlow area where they're purchasing vehicles with MTI funds and working with SCVT to provide some of their trips to build their capacity. We'll see what those per trip costs are and if they are cheaper or less expensive, more efficient than if SCVT was to make those investments on its own. And so for Gopher, we have another year in our pilot, 3-year pilot of providing funds. And we get our applications in April. I'm hoping we can make good on another year. But until we get those applications and see what is needed to sustain existing services, and then we see what do we need for capital, and then what do we need to sustain our pilots, and at some point the money does run out. But Gopher's been nothing but a good partner to GMT by all accounts. But these are tough times for sure, and I do not want to sugarcoat the funding predicament that we are in. But if we're working with GMT Urban to save some money through the rural transfers. GMT Urban continues to make these types of cuts that Clayton just talked about. We sustain all rural services, currently meeting the route performance report. And we worked on those 13 routes that do not meet the acceptable threshold and reduce hours or services associated with those, combining with other services, everything that you've heard about earlier. Then we can then use the VPTA identification of cost saving measures, share it with everyone else, see what we can do as a unit, and share that across all reports. And for example, in VTrans, we'll be losing a part-time position in the next few months when somebody retires. She was a business manager at AHS. That position will not be refilled. There's a $60,000, 100% federal line item that can go back into transit. So we're short. That's 5% of it. If that's what else can VTrans do to lower our own costs? Having one fewer rural provider makes me think like we could manage that reduction in hours, because we are going to be seeing a reduction in capacity. Anyway, then with all this being said, I bundle that up. I approach the VTrans Budget Committee and demonstrate a commitment to efficient services, momentum of effort on service reductions, discuss the regional transfers, and then we look at that new post-COVID, post-inflation number, 2.6 short, we're 3.2 short, whatever that is. And then that will be the agency's opportunity in 20. So we only do this 1 by 1 year, as opposed to the 3-year or 5-year plans, like if we were on a board of a business. And but that would give us our best chance to work with the budget committee to see how far we can go for 27. But first things first is 26. Very thankful for the support of the administration's budget for 26. And we've got a lot of work to do between now and this time next year to identify what 27 is going to look like. And I believe that is, our response. We have nothing to push back on or anything like that. We feel like we can move forward through the coordinated implementation plan with all parties and get to the finish line with this particular effort.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Representative Pouch?
Yeah, I would certainly support the coordinated implementation assistance plan, that sort of activity, because these can be big lifts for the rural folks, and having that some support, because they may not have the actual people to go through those numbers. So doing this on a larger scale like that it seems like a good way to go about it. So
thank you. And we knew that like the devil in the details, right? And so how do we get to those details? Well, let's get the legislation changed to allow for that flexibility. Let's get to this plan, and then making sure that everybody signs off on it, and then make it happen. And then, we certainly understand the effort. And Jim Moulton would remind me, last time he did this with Stagecoach in Addison County, he developed walking pneumonia. Now, is it just because of this? I don't know. But I say, well, don't forget, Jim, we have video calls instead of going over the mountain 2 or 3 times a week. He's got a bigger staff now that he has TVT instead of Actor. And we have an opportunity when they look at some underperforming routes. TVT has a few of those to move this forward and then expand the accordion as they come into Washington County, while looking at their overall needs and resources. Maybe a big opportunity for TVT to reestablish the capacities that they need to stay on top of financials, operations. Same thing with RCT in the past, with their 65% Medicaid, to bring that up to more like a 50-50 Medicaid transit split, a little bit more fixed route as well as demand response. That's a better balance, and we're hoping they can build the bench a little bit more like TVT was when they combined with Stagecoach. So there's benefits potentially throughout. We know what the benefits could be for GMT Urban as well. But again, just like our contraction budget with expanded budget, yeah, can say something, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we've got to start making this.
Representative
I
Patrick
guess
Leahy.
this is for you, Ross, but, thank you. The legislative language, which you totally get, have we gotten this already?
It's in the Steve Fowles report.
Oh, it's in the report, okay.
Yeah, the slide,
We haven't gotten it
yeah.
already. Yeah.
You
What's
know,
in the admin?
No, it's not in the
Okay.
T-bill.
Yeah,
you know, from last year's mobility guide, that's not my strong point after you wrote that book.
thank you.
Representative Wood?
So, question, so as you hired a consultant to help with envisioning this plan for how to transition the rural transportation away from GMT. Couple questions on that. Number one, is there an opportunity to be looking, like we've talked as a committee, we know that education funding needs to be reformed. We're losing public transport money, budgets are going down. And we've talked like, is there an opportunity to be looking at public transportation in rural areas and working with school buses to reach some efficiencies and to sustain public transportation and not cut some of these routes? So that's one question, which, if there's an opportunity to do like a study in Stowe or in the Mad River Valley, looking at that, we have had some conversations with people, students, et cetera, and there is some interest and willingness. And then, is there an opportunity to be looking at fares in some of these rural areas? And I guess my comment is that, hearing some of GMT's struggles and, recognizing that, marketing has been a little bit short in some of these areas, I would hate to see something like the Mad River Valley lower route cut at this time before kind of putting in the effort to make sure it's efficient, get the word out. I mean, I would argue that I think there's opportunity there. So those are some of my comments, questions.
It's a lot. But for schools, right now, in addition to the neighborhood special services that are combining public transit and schools, there's 40 schools that are being served right now with rural transit services. Sometimes that's because the bus is going by the school and it makes sense and you can adjust the schedules a little bit. Sometimes the school comes to us and says, hey, if we're able to put that bus on the road and pick up the school kids, then we could really justify a public transit route. And we call that tripper service. And so SCVT, TVT are among the leaders in providing that type of combination. Several in 2021, I believe, Transportation for Vermont, or the Future of Transportation not-for-profit group, asked us to participate in a study where we brought Mount Mansfield, a school, in with electric bus and public transit and tried to plan on what that would look like. At the end of the day, because of the way the school starts a little later and ends a little bit earlier, adding on another route and adding, and of course where Mount Mansfield is located, we just couldn't justify and come up with an approach that made sense. I think we would see that, but if there's a study to show like where are those opportunities, I'm dying to know as well. One thing we probably won't see is school buses being opened up to the general public. It doesn't take very long in a public meeting for somebody to say, well, I'm worried about the safety of our kids, and anybody can get on these school buses unattended and those types of things. And so that's been our experience, but desperate times call for desperate measures. And if there's some opportunity here, we got to run toward it.
And I would just follow up on that. We had a group of students, the Vermont State Youth Lobby here, high school students who were very receptive and thought that actually combining the public with students would cut down on the bullying that happens on the school buses. They are, one of their goals is climate change, resiliency, et cetera. Obviously, we know public transport is a much better choice than a private car. And I know I sound like a commercial, but when talking about marketing, if we are including high school students in public transit and getting them used to using public transit in high school, the opportunity for them to do that as adults is kind of built in. So just making a request. I think there is some opportunity there. I would love to figure out how we can support you all doing that research.
That's not lost on us, and that's been identified through our marketing investments and through Go Vermont program. And even if they're on a school bus, that's better than having your mom and dad take you every day for just being part of a shared system and service. Fares. Very quickly, before COVID hit, we generated about $550,000 in fares. That is split between 50-50 for operations. So 275 off the federal dollars, 275 from local, which includes state funds, non-federal match dollars. And to move forward in 27, we could be looking at that. Even if it's going to save us $250,000, that's real money. And we're not in a position to say, no, that's not really of interest to us. It will take $1.5 million potentially in fare box revenue to get the systems that GMT Urban has, I think is the expectation. I just want to swipe my card. I want to have, abilities to use different fare media. That could be pricey, and we have a capital concern. And we'll see what we're able to get through this funding round with competitive capital funds for our vehicles, but to not buy, 10 cutaways so that we could buy fare media, save $250,000 off the Fed and the non-federal books. That's a consideration and calculation we'll have to make together.
One more question down here, Representative Blau.
Yeah, just to echo Representative White on the school busing thing, I think, we're probably likely to head in a direction where we're going to have regional high schools. And it would be, I think this is incredibly important for high school students to at least find out the feasibility of them having this as an option for getting to school, for normalizing that behavior as future adults, and it aligns with a lot of our Vermont values. But also, it seems like the potential for this could be measured very simply just through some heat maps. What is the sort of high school bus shed, that could work? And obviously it won't work for in all instances, but maybe there could be gathering places somebody could catch a ride to get to, just as we're trying to reduce costs. So anyway, I hope you guys will be part of that conversation. We're certainly hearing busing and transportation as issues that are starting to percolate up in all of these discussions. So very timely.
We've been able to speak about land use a few times, Representative, and it all comes down to land use. And if we are going to be pushing, folks to larger commutes to their school, that heat map makes sense. We've done heat maps with nutrition needs and where along our corridors and those types of things. This would be another, study. It wouldn't only be busing. Could it be the carpool pickup slug lanes, right? We may be referring to, could they be some sponsored van pools, those types of things. But this would really have to be looking at all modes and all ways to coordinate as best we can.
All right, we all done with questions. Is there any, we're wrapped up a little bit early. Is there anybody else online or here that wants to chime in or testify to them? I guess we got Ben Thompson.
If there aren't any other questions. I was wondering if you could speak a bit to this, the federal fiscal cliff we've been talking about from COVID funds. And I'm not clear on why it's hitting GMT Urban before the rural providers. And then, so number one, just trying to understand a bit more about that. And two, in the context of talking about transferring some of GMT's service for the rural service to other providers, I'm assuming that assessment is taking into consideration the fiscal cliff that we've been hearing rural providers will also experience. And so, how
Sure. And so after COVID hit and we started drawing down the rest of our COVID funds, we put serious pressure on our rural providers to make cuts. And so we have some routes that are even on the FY 24 route performance report that are no longer there. Thetford Connector comes to mind. The Jeffersonville has been canceled. But we moved to reduce the overall cost of the rural services because commuter demand had changed. So GMT, just a year or two later, through Plains leadership, started making those same considerations and are now making their cuts as well. I did share a chart with you when we talked about budget, which was the money that GMT Urban received in 2017 as a percentage of our $22 million core budget is very close to the percentage they're receiving now with our $44 million core budget. So we've been trying to maintain a level of geographic equity as well as route adjustments throughout the state. And so Urban's a little different, as you know, they're an authority and had a different process, but they're now working to make those types of cuts. And you can see those cuts aren't having the impact that we may originally have thought. So as they continue to work in that direction, we'll continue to work with our providers. And if we have another $1 million in rural cuts because they don't meet the acceptable thresholds, that just goes to Urban. We don't have two budgets where it's urban and rural. We have a FTA flex or an FHWA flex, and then we determine what do we need to cover our existing routes and what can we provide to GMT Urban. And so as I mentioned, we in our budget would have a $3 million line item for years and years. It was always 3.6, 4.2 at the end of the day. We have a budget and a plan, and then we get the applications, and then we do what we can. And we've increased that to 4 million for FY26. And with those carbon reduction programs, it could get up to 4.7, depending on those applications. Very difficult to project. But that's why, you know, the urban and rural system mirror each other, but there's a little bit of a lag right now in the urban system. And maybe the costs increase in the rural services haven't been at the same pace as the GMT urban cost increases. And so you have that consideration as well. The second part of your question, I'm sorry.
I guess, well, if we're anticipating sort of a federal funding drop off for rural providers as well, how that's been taken into consideration, but maybe based on your response.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're not looking at a reduction in federal funds. We're looking at working with our providers to reduce the services federal funds are paying for so that in 27, the dollars are reduced. We expect to have the same level of federal funding, but right now, if we didn't make any changes on the rural side, we'd be looking at a $1.5 million shortfall in 26. We get the carbon reduction programs. We work with to bend that cost curve down on those underperforming routes. And can we meet and actually sustain services and not make any cuts because of the budget, but only because of the metrics of the route performance report? And that's what we're trying to sustain in this turbulent time. We'll get through these next couple of years and get to that new normal. Then we can start again looking at our new scheduling dispatch service and combining microtransit with our other demand response services. What are those opportunities in the next generation? But right now, we still have to reach a plateau here that is sustainable.
All right, any more questions? If not, I guess we'll go to break and be back at 3:30.